It's the zombie apocalypse. There's flesh-eating monsters roaming the streets and you can only choose one companion to help you survive. Who do you pick? The bodybuilder, the powerlifter, the martial artist, the free runner, or the crossfitter? Or put it another way, would you rather have Arnie, Bruce Lee, Sebastian Foucan, Ronnie Coleman, Rich Froning, or someone else on your side? Maybe Albert Einstein, maybe it's all about the brains. In other words, what kind of training is the most effective for helping you to survive a hypothetical zombie apocalypse? I just want to point out before we get started that this is all my opinion. It's supposed to be a little bit of fun, of course. That's going to cause some ire if I say that your training method isn't as useful as someone else's for surviving the zombie apocalypse, but keep in mind this is just one scenario, and if you watch through to the end you'll see why actually every kind of training is super valuable. There's lots of very awesome reasons to train, but I think that one of the coolest reasons is in order to be ready for anything. I like to think that if ever there was a alien invasion, I think alien invasions are cooler than zombie apocalypses, but I thought that zombie apocalypse had more punch for the headline of this video. But either way, either there's an alien invasion or a zombie apocalypse, and it's not going to matter how rich you are or your status or what job you've got or your popularity. All that matters is how well you've been training, how strong you are, how fast you are, and that's when you can step up to the plate and save the day and you're the hero and everyone cheers for you. And that's normally about when I wake up. But obviously some forms of training are going to be better than others for surviving this situation, this scenario, so I thought it would be fun to take a look at the different training modalities and ask which would be the most useful in a scenario like this. And if it sounds ridiculous, then bear in mind that this is a mental exercise that both the CDC and the Department of Defense in the US use in order to test whether or not they're ready for anything. So this is quite a cool kind of litmus test for your general ability to perform in a crisis, and presumably if you're good at surviving a zombie apocalypse, then you could also be good at surviving another more boring real world scenario, like maybe you're in a hostage situation, which is neither that realistic or boring. You know what I mean.
My prayers have finally been answered.
You prayed for a hostage situation?
Yes, I did, every single day.
There is actually a difference between training and exercising. So a lot of people exercise, they work out, whereas that's not quite the same as training. So in exercise or working out, it's all about that session, that training session. You're trying to burn calories, build muscle, break down muscle. It's all about the here and now. It's a kind of health maintenance, or maybe you're working towards some kind of goal, but on the whole, it's about what you can do in that session. On the other hand, training is normally the reserve of athletes or military personnel, and the idea here is that you're working towards a set goal, normally within a specific domain. So you're trying to get faster for a race, or you're trying to get stronger for a powerlifting competition. And now it's not so much about the here and now. It's not about killing yourself in each and every workout. Instead, it's about building yourself up towards that end goal, that end date, and building that specific type of strength and performance. So you might have a periodized training program. This would include things like rest days, and it would build up and it would mix things up in order to keep your body, surprised and guessing, but also building upon each last session in order to gradually improve in a specific domain. So training and exercise in that regard are quite different. But I don't want to exercise, I want to train. Training is what Gopi does, and so obviously that's what I want to do. You don't hear Batman saying I'm going to do my exercises now. So if we're not athletes and we're not training for a specific event, how can what we do be called training? Well, it is somewhat related to another concept called general physical preparedness. And general physical preparedness basically refers to the kind of additional training that someone who is training for an event would do. So Louis Simmons of Westside Barbell describes it as I'm paraphrasing, a modicum of fitness that is useful for absolute strength. So in other words, you might be a powerlifter, your aim might be to lift as much weight as possible, but you need some cardio fitness, you need some muscle endurance, you probably want some flexibility, you need to look after your general health. So in other words, you can't be so specified in your training that you ignore everything else, because otherwise, you're lacking the foundation, the pillars of fitness that will allow you to excel in a specific area. At the same time, an athlete who's training for golf or football or sprinting is also going to do other types of training on top in order to ensure that they are all round healthy, as well as being great at that one specific thing. So in theory, What if we took the idea of general physical preparedness and made that the goal of our training, so we're training to be as prepared as possible for anything? I call this sometimes general preparedness training or ready for anything training. And in this scenario, we're training for a hypothetical situation, which is a zombie apocalypse. And I'd argue that that's kind of what a lot of people are doing these days. People who are training with their functional exercises, who are training with mobility, gymnastic strength. They're not trying to just look good, they're not just trying to build calories, they're trying to support their body, prevent injury, improve their 1 rep maxes, keep hitting PBs. These aren't physical professionals, they're not athletes, but a lot of us now are not just interested in training to look better or to maintain our health. We want to be our best, even though there's no end point in mind. So with all that out of the way, what would be the best training modality? Well, the obvious thing to pick would be everything. Why pick at all? Why not be a jack of all trades? Why not train as a long distance running, sprinting, parkour, power building martial artist? Well, there's a few good reasons. The first is that most of us don't have enough time in the week to do all those different types of training, especially as most of us also need to have lives outside of it, and maintaining your general health is also important. You need recovery, as I talked about in my recent video. At the same time, there's something called the interference principle, and the interference principle means that when you get really good in one domain, it can actually end up interfering with others, meaning that it's impossible to be a top level athlete who is both a sprinter and a long distance runner. You can be very good at both, which might be the best strategy here. We'll get into that more, but you can't be the best at both because long distance running and short distance running require different skills and different biology. One is slow twitch muscle fiber, one is fast twitch muscle fiber. So if you're going to train to build one up more, then you're removing your capacity in the other area. In fact, this issue is true to such an extent that swimmers have been shown in one study to have a lower jumping height than the average person, even though they've got powerful and well-developed leg muscles, because they've trained to use them in a different way. They've learned different movement patterns and they've built them in different ways. So actually the fact that they're so good at swimming is interfering with their ability to jump, even though they have better leg muscles. So swimmers are screwed come the zombie apocalypse. They'll be all right in a water world scenario, but for zombie apocalypse situations, we're in trouble. And this is then why something like CrossFit needs to be taken and looked at under the microscope, because in theory, CrossFit's a cool idea for being generally prepared, ready for anything, but you're going to have some interference principles. So these guys are going to be great across the board, but they're not going to be the best at any one specific skill. And the question is whether the skills they've chosen are interfering with each other or not, whether they've chosen good skills to train all at the same time. Obviously, some kinds of training don't interfere with each other. So if you train your grip strength, that's not going to interfere with you being a long distance runner. They're too far removed. Likewise, as we've seen with general physical preparedness, some types of training actually complement each other. So training your brain isn't going to hurt your martial arts, it's going to improve it. The skill that arguably you're going to need the most, and a lot of people agree, rule number one of Zombieland is cardio or running, the ability to run away. And that's true of zombie apocalypses, alien apocalypses, and also just being mugged. The best thing you can do is to run away, as long as you're not leaving your wife and children with the attackers.
Rule number one for surviving Zombieland: cardio.
Normally running away is the best strategy. So cardio is good because you can keep running, you can keep going and not tire out, and that's also really important for a fight. That's why Bruce Lee said cardio is so important. And any boxer, you'll just watch a boxing match and you'll see how important cardio is. That's why they're all hugging each other and lying on top of each other at the end. At the same time though, you also need to be fast and quick. You need to be able to run away from a group that's surrounding you, especially if these are 28 days later style fast zombies. It's not enough to just jog away. You need to be able to sprint fast to get out of danger as soon as possible and out of exploding buildings and other hazards that you're going to face during the apocalypse. So that means that it might make sense to train with high intensity interval training. So you're combining steady state cardio with bouts of intensity, high intensity. And the best way to do this, I would argue, is with Fartlek Training, which I've discussed before. It's got a stupid name. Fartlek Training means time play. So you're running and just alternating between fast and slow exercise, high exertion, light recovery during your training. And there's not necessarily a set modality for that. I would say aim to run 4 miles a day, roughly, or a bit further or a bit less, whatever suits you. And then try and speed up how quickly you can do that by gradually moving the ratio more towards the sprinting and less towards the cardio. When it comes to escaping, it's also very important that you be able to climb and jump. That's why I mentioned Sebastian Foucan. I think parkour would be incredibly useful in this situation. I actually think that the martial application of parkour and free running is something that doesn't get discussed enough, but if you are being chased and you can jump over something or onto something, then you've immediately captured the high ground, and that's a very good strategy. The reason for this is that if you're on top of something and you're being chased, then those zombies, even if they're good climbers, are going to have to climb that thing to follow you, and you can kick them off. Likewise, if you've jumped over something.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Yeah, doing some parkour, some free running would be great. That also means incorporating things like pull-ups and other bodyweight exercises into your training. Climbing and bouldering would be really awesome. That builds the grip strength as well, which we've already said, you know, in previous videos is important for building your overall strength, and it's not going to add any mass or anything, any size, or slow you down. So at the moment, we've got someone doing high intensity interval training and parkour. That's a great combination for getting away. You can run across the rooftops, jump, go long distances, stay out of sight, lay low. But having some strength is going to be important as well, not only for fighting the zombies if they catch up to you, but also for fighting your fellow man, because as we all know from watching these films, they are often the biggest threat when you're fighting for resources, or when one of you is actually secretly working for the big organization that caused this whole mess. So having some strength is important, and I think our objective here is to build as much strength as possible without slowing ourselves down, because unfortunately big bulky muscle, although I've said in the past doesn't slow you down as such, it isn't energy efficient. It's not going to help with running long distances. So I'm not saying it's bad, but ideally we want to build as much of a good strength to weight ratio as possible. So we want to build as much strength as possible without packing on more size than necessary, so that we can stay light and nimble. Mobility will also be important, so we'll keep stretching. So what kind of training would be good for this? Well, I think calisthenics is actually the most functional type of training, and I've talked about this before. If you want to build the kind of strength that's useful in the real world, go for calisthenics. If you've tried to do something like a planche push-up, you will know that that incorporates your entire body, all these supporting muscles, incredible body control, balance and all these things, and it's highly adaptable, because the thing about your body is you're going to be in a slightly different position every time. I've always said that climbing trees is one of the most functional things you can do, because every tree is different, every branch is a different width. When you're running and climbing and jumping and lifting heavy things off the ground to use as a weapon, it's not going to always be with the perfect technique, it's not always going to be an ideal size, it's not always going to be a barbell, unless that you're being invaded in the gym, which would be awesome, but that won't always happen. So you need to make sure that you're adaptable and you can respond to any situation or scenario, and I think that bodyweight training is one of the best ways to do that, and that will keep you light as possible whilst allowing you to build as much strength and power as you can. And at the same time, I think we should do lots of explosive plyometrics, so that we're explosive, so we're fast, so we can jump high, punch hard, and get away, and that's what's really going to be useful. I would also combine this with some traditional strength training, weight training. Being strong also has its advantages, as long as you don't get too bulky in order to become heavy or to consume too much energy. Muscle isn't energy efficient, although as I said previously in another video, it doesn't actually slow you down as such. So good forms of training for that would include compound movements with big heavy weights, overcoming isometrics, so you can build muscle fiber recruitment without having too much bulk. I would say also you could combine this with just a little bit of bodybuilding style training, because this is actually very good for muscle endurance, and that allows you to exert strength over an extended period of time, and also adding a little bit of muscle can act as a kind of plating, and if you do this then you'll be able to carry the heavy artillery or lift debris off of your trapped comrades, etc. Of course martial arts is going to be really useful, and anyone who tells you that martial arts don't make you a better fighter doesn't know what they're talking about. If you've ever been in a fight with someone who doesn't know martial arts, they punch like this with large arcing movements, no power, big hooks, and they kick by just flailing their legs at you that you can then catch. Martial arts turns your movements into far more honed and practiced and lethal blows. That would make a huge difference in a fight. And like I say, it's not only about fighting the zombies, it's also about fighting your evil comrades that you're trapped in the bunker with. Which martial art is the best for survival? Well, I'm not going to get into that. That is opening Pandora's box. However, I think most people would agree that combining a striking martial art and a grappling martial art is a very good place to start. But actually, I would argue that the person who would be most useful, who I didn't include at the start there, that was a little bit of a trick, the person who would be most useful in a real zombie apocalypse scenario would be a member of the Special Forces, someone with actual Special Forces training. And that's not only because they are actually trained in, combat and firearms training. Of course, that's also going to be rather important. My scenario, you don't have a gun. But they also are exposed to these kind of dangerous situations all the time, and that makes a huge difference. A lot of this is going to be mental. You don't want to go to pieces in the zombie apocalypse, because that's not going to help anybody, and that normally happens to at least one character, and it never ends well for them. So you need to be able to stay calm and collected in a desperate situation, and the best way you can do that is probably with meditation and perhaps with CBT. I'll talk about that more, as I've said before, but meditation helps you to focus on what's important and what matters, rather than being distracted by the anxious thoughts that aren't actually helping you out in this scenario. And exposing yourself to higher stress situations will also help. I talked in my video on flow states in part 2, or maybe it was part 1, watch them both. I talked in that about how the top performers, especially in the Special Forces, had a metronomic heart rate and the ability to become more aroused and alert whilst they were in a dangerous situation, but also to be more calm and relaxed in between, so that they could then recover, do the things that needed to be done, and then become more aroused again when it was time to go and fight. And they also weren't actually as anxious during this, and partly that was potentially due to the production of DHEA, which helped to keep them calmer even though their heart rate was aroused. Studies show that DHEA suppresses the activity of cortisol in the hippocampus and other key brain areas. So it means that you can be aroused, like alert, psyched up, but not psyched out. And that's how you need to be in this kind of scenario. Like I say, meditation is one of the best things you can actually use to improve that, at the same time putting yourself in awkward situations where you normally get stressed and reminding yourself to breathe, focus, and not get too stressed out. Being mentally sharp and focused and alert is important. Getting lots of sleep will help with this. So too will eating the right diet, adding nootropics perhaps. But at the same time, studies show, and this is the kind of firearms training that you can do, studies show that playing computer games actually increases your decision-making accuracy without slowing it down. Sorry, increases your decision-making speed without harming your accuracy. So in other words, people who play computer games, particularly shooting games, and especially at a competitive level, are better at making a quick judgment call and the right judgment call when they have to. And that's because, once again, it's said, specific adaptation to imposed demands, they are practicing being in a firefight, and even though it's virtual, the brain doesn't know that, and you're still deciding which target is the most important to shoot first. You're still better at scouting for potential enemies on the horizon. And in fact, these studies also show that computer game players have greater visual acuity. They're better at differentiating between shades of grey. So in other words, they can also see the targets on the horizon better as well. So in short, you need to be able to practice in some way being in a situation where you're using your senses, where you're reacting and making decisions, and computer games is one of the best ways to do that. And as I've said on this channel before, I reckon that using virtual reality would take that one step further, because now you're completely immersed, using all your senses and your limbs. So play some Super Hot on Oculus Rift or some Robo Recall, and that could help you to survive the zombie apocalypse. Next time someone tells you off for playing too many computer games, you just point out that it's helping you to survive the zombie apocalypse. When that happens, they'll be sorry and you'll be laughing. Unless there's someone you love, in which case, as they're being eaten, you'll be crying. Watch those videos on flow states though, because I do give some more tips, things such as wide angle vision for spotting enemies on the horizon, and such as box breathing, which is a technique you can use to calm yourself down and stay focused even when you're stressed and in a life or death situation. So to summarize, I think that the best zombie survival training would incorporate long distance running and fast running, so high intensity interval training, with calisthenics, bodyweight training, parkour, rock climbing potentially. All these things you can do in a single training regime without too much trouble. I managed something similar. At the same time, it wouldn't hurt to condition your knuckles and your fists, to throw in some martial arts definitely, or at least heavy bag work, and to train with some big lifts to build up more strength, but without being whilst being mindful not to add too much bulk, etc.
Oh, and as I've said before in previous videos, this is also why I really like the idea of having a day or half a workout set aside for skills. Skills training being things like grip strength or ambidexterity training, or enhancing your senses, for instance, or increasing your awareness. all the kind of stuff that sounds really awesome, that you mean to get into your training, toughening your knuckles, increasing flexibility, all that stuff that could potentially save your ass in these sorts of situations, but that doesn't easily fit into a regular workout, all the stuff that Batman might have in his arsenal. I'm not going to go into that into detail here because I want to do a video in future on the skills training workout, so stay tuned for that.
But as I said at the start of this video, this is only one scenario. So what happens if like I say, it's Waterworld, in which case all the swimmers will survive. So really you want to be as cross-modal as possible. And also, zombie apocalypse probably isn't the most likely thing to happen to you. There are other scenarios where strength can be very useful, such as moving house, and ready for anything training means being ready for those things too. And of course, the real survival skill in a zombie apocalypse is teamwork. It's sticking together, and we all know that the person who goes off on their own is the one who gets eaten first. So that means that really the best thing to do is to have a range of skills, a range of specialized skills in a group of people. So that's why I'm saying that every kind of training has its benefits, and we all have our own genetic predisposition. We all have certain types, body types that we start out with. So the ectomorph isn't necessarily going to be very useful when it comes to moving the rubble that's trapped you in the bunker, but they might be good for running long distance and going on, fetching the food. So yeah, send the skinny guy out to fetch the food. Likewise, having the tank, the big bulky guy, to carry the heavy artillery, he's going to be useful too. That would be the best scenario, to have one of each person, the traqueur for getting up onto high ground and looking out for danger ahead, and the martial artist for fighting the first wave of attackers when they break down the door and doing that heroic sacrifice. So yeah, it's a bit like an RPG, a computer game, where at the beginning you get to choose your type and you have some attributes that you're already slightly stronger in, and it might be that for you the best thing to do is to focus on those attributes and become the best version of that you can be, whether that's the powerful tank or the long distance runner. For most of us, we're more jacks of all trades. We tend to be mesomorphs. Average is more common by definition. So for most of us, it makes sense to pick and choose a few different training modalities. Yeah, give zombie apocalypse training or ready for anything training a go, and let me know if you like the sounds of that in the comments down below. Let me know what you agree with and disagree with in this video. Let me know what you think the best form of training would be to survive some kind of situation like this. And yeah, thanks a ton for watching. I really appreciate it. If you did enjoy this video, then please leave a like, please share it around. That helps me out massively. You can follow me on social media where you can get more information on the brand, what I'm doing. You can see my workouts, you can find out first when I post new videos, etc. And of course, check out the full website, the blog, over at thebioneer.com. There'll be a version of this posted there, either now or soon, and that goes into even more detail. So if you want the full story, then you need to follow me on all of the different forms of media. And like I say, I massively appreciate it. It helps me out a huge amount, and I love talking to you guys down there. You've always got loads of really interesting to say, and you've given me tons of ideas for future videos. So yeah, thanks a ton, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.
One final consideration is that it's not just important to be well trained, but also to be ready in the moment. That means, for instance, that you can't have just done a massive legs day, because then it's difficult to walk, let alone run and fight. You want to be wearing the right clothes. If you're wearing smart dress shoes and restrictive trousers, you're not going to be able to move around as freely, and you can't be completely wasted after a long bender. Can you imagine if, Ultron attacked and all the Avengers had just been on a pub crawl? Could happen with Tony Stark, but you get the point. So I'm not saying that you can't have fun, but you've got to keep your wits about you, like a scout. I actually was attacked once, not by aliens or zombies, but by real people. Didn't go so well for me. I was punched 8 times in the face. That's actually how I got these scars. Some people have asked on previous videos. Part of the reason for that was that I was outnumbered and jumped. Part of the reason was that I was very drunk on a night out and thought it was a great plan to stand there making jokes, not fighting back or running away. So point is that if you want to be truly ready for anything, you need to be a bit tactical. You need to keep your wits about you, not get too paralytic. wear trainers maybe, because that way you can break into a run if necessary. I'm a bit unusual, but I always like wearing trainers so I can turn any trip into a jog. Perhaps wear flexible fabric denim. That's what I'm in right now. Of course, that is if you're completely dedicated to being ready for a zombie apocalypse, which, not everyone sees as a priority.